Discussion over dinner. This is our home. I came to listen to you, to talk with you, 'cause I don't wanna be a stranger, to find hope with you, to grow with you. And whether we are different or the same, I wanna know your name. Discussion over dinner is sponsored and underwritten by State Street Community Church and the Pax Center.
Welcome to Discussion over dinner in January. We are talking tonight about elementary education and the state of elementary education in LaPorte County. And I want to make sure that you know that we have a couple more live discussion over dinners in a row. I'm going to need you to go sit in the back of the class now. No. We have a couple fun conversations coming up and important, what I think, to our community. Now, next month, because it is Black History Month and a couple different other things, we're going to have a conversation on race in LaPorte County. And then in March, we're going to have a conversation on the intermediate school here in LaPorte. Lots of things are changing in LaPorte education there. We're putting the 5th grade from elementary into our, middle school. And we're going to have a conversation about middle school education, kind of how middle schoolers are, because I don't understand middle schoolers at all. And hopefully we'll be able to understand what the school system's doing, but also understand middle school education a little bit more. And so I hope you can come to that in February and March. We'll take a month off in April. We've got Easter and all kinds of stuff here at State Street. But please do make plans on attending these events and invite your friends. And for everyone streaming with us today, thank you so much for streaming. If you want to share the stream on your Facebook, you're welcome to do that as well. Today we've got a great panel of friends for me, but also experts in the community on education matters. Different careers, different experiences, but I think they'll be able to educate us on the state of elementary education in LaPorte County. So I'm going to introduce our panel to you now. He grew up in South Bend, Indiana. After graduating from Washington High School and the South Bend Community School Corporation, he majored in business administration from Ball State. Without a teaching license, he was hired to teach a 5th grade elementary class at Prairie Elementary School, a position he held until his retirement in 2012. In his time as an educator, he coached more than 100 teams, developed a 3-mile environmental trail, and started a tutoring program that met each morning with 8 to 12 low-performing students. In the 5 years of this program, every student that attended the tutoring program regularly passed the I-STEP exam at the end of the year. For his roles in building the 3-mile environmental trail, he was recognized as a county, state, and national teacher of the year. After retiring as an educator, he and his partner in education and wife, Jane, helped create and manage the Jackson Street Community Garden in the Brighton Street Green Space in downtown LaPorte, Indiana. Will you please welcome our first panelist, John Slater. She was born in Oregon, and she will tell you, and lived there for 21 years. She began her college career at Oregon State, but saw the error of her ways and finished a degree in elementary education with a kindergarten and reading endorsement from Indiana University. She taught preschool for 4 years before moving to kindergarten at Prairie Elementary, go Bulldogs, where she has been teaching for 17 years. At Prairie, she is a member of the crisis team, CPI trained, the RTL co-chairperson, student council co-sponsor, and teaches at the after-school program Bulldog Club. Outside of school, she works with youth through LaPorte County 4-H and the Goat Club of LaPorte County. She lives in Rolling Prairie on a small farm with her husband, Tony, of 27 years, along with her 3 daughters, 1 adorable granddaughter, 1 son-in-law, 1 adorable son-in-law, 1 soon-to-be son-in-law, and more animals than she can count. Please welcome to our panel our second panelist, Krissy Surma. He was born and raised in LaPorte, Indiana, and still resides here with his wife of 14 years and their 3 lovely daughters. He graduated from the Bethel College with a bachelor's degree in elementary education and earned his master's degree in educational leadership from Indiana University Northwest. He is currently in his 3rd year as principal of Prairie Elementary School in Michigan City, Indiana. This year is his 8th year with the district, previously teaching and serving as an instructional coach. Before his time in Michigan City, he spent 9 years teaching in the Gary Community School Corporation. All of his experience has been in elementary education. Please welcome to our panel, our final panelist, Zach Huber. So thank you so much for being here, guys. And you can pick up your microphones. We're going to ask lots of questions. I want to encourage everyone here. You can text the phone number here if you have questions. If you have our app, the State Street Community Church app downloaded, you can go through the app as well, and you can click through there, and you can see all their bios and all kinds of fun stuff there, and be able to connect for a question through that as well. So let's start with this. Krissy Surma.
Is this on?
Yes.
First of all, giving me a microphone is living life dangerously for you. I'm just telling you that ahead of time.
I promise you, you won't do any more damage to me than I do to myself most Sundays.
Okay, I'm ready.
So, Krissy, you've been teaching for, 17 years?
It's my 18th. This year's my 18th.
What made you get into teaching?
You know what? My mom did. She was a preschool teacher for quite a few years, and I just saw the joy that she had doing it, and I loved working with kids. It is amazing because every day is new. Every single day is new. And why would you not want to go somewhere where every day they tell you you're beautiful and they love you?
That changes in 5th grade.
Yeah. I teach kindergarten.
That's not my experience as the pastor of this church, by the way.
No, it's great. You really literally get to see the future in their eyes and the way they're thinking. You get to see them grow. It's just amazing. Amazing.
Zach, what made you get into teaching?
I honestly don't know for sure. I was around kids a lot, really enjoyed and loved that sort of thing. I cadet taught in high school, and then sort of that solidified this love for watching kids grow and learn and excuse me, and the joy that came with that. So I think it wasn't an always thing. It sort of crept up on me in my high school years.
Now, John here is my former teacher, actually, and a legend at Rolling Prairie Elementary School. Most kids that went through Rolling Prairie Elementary wanted to have John Slater as their teacher. And so when he retired, I know a lot of people mourned that loss because he was such a great teacher in 5th grade, but also just a consistent presence at the school. But John, you have a very interesting story. You didn't major in elementary education, did you?
I did not.
How did you get into teaching?
Well, it wasn't my mother. Believe it or not, it was my dentist.
Really?
Yes. It was the Vietnam War was going on. I couldn't get a job. I had a high draft number, and in those days you could discriminate. You didn't have to hire someone, and you could say, well, come back and see me after you go to Vietnam. And I was talking to my dentist about it, and he said, I saw that there was an opening at Rolling Prairie School in LaVille, and he said, you know what, I think you would be pretty good at it. And I had worked at the park department for 3 years in the summer, and I'd had his son, so there was some connection. I'm like, really? So I thought, this will be fun. So I went and applied, not thinking I would get the job. And lo and behold, I got the job. And I have to confess, the first year was really rough. I had no clue what I was doing. I'm not sure why they kept me. I don't know. So it was a process. It took a long time to get there.
And that was back before you didn't have to have a teaching license to become a teacher?
So this is a funny story, too. No, you didn't have to have a license, and I had to get a permit each year. And the idea was you're on a permit, and then at the end of the year, they would hire someone that actually had a license to teach. So the principal, for whatever reason, liked me, and he said, you know what, you got to resign. but we'll hire you back the next year. This went on for 9 years until I got everything I needed to be licensed as an elementary teacher. So I didn't think anything about it. And then we had Mr. Harding come in as a superintendent about 20 years later, and he was going through the personnel files. And he called me up and he said, John, I have never seen a file so crazy in my life. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you resigned 9 years in a row and then you came back. What in the world is going on? So.
And it is true, John was my teacher. He was also my mother's teacher. And there's rumors that he was my grandfather's teacher as well. Unfortunately, the data doesn't go back that far. So, no, I'm just kidding. John, interesting story for you that John and Jane, I lost connection with for many years. And I always loved John as a teacher. One of the most, probably had one of the biggest impacts as an educator in my life. And when we reconnected 7 years ago, it was over a garden, actually. John wanted to spend some time in his retirement helping kids learn how to garden. And John's been doing an amazing job, John and Jane and Joe and all of our volunteers for that, but doing an amazing job teaching kids how to garden, but also just life skills, how to be human, how to get along, how to find something you're passionate about and stick to that goal and move on. So I'm glad you're here, John, and I value you so much. Krissy, you started teaching, and this is your 18th year. I'm going to guess lots has changed since then. In the students, in the schools, what are some of the things that have changed the most for you?
Well, for me, one thing, we used to be half-day kindergarten, and now it's all-day kindergarten. So those little 5-year-olds had to learn how to be there all day long instead of half-day and go home and take a nap. So that was a big change, but we've handled it, and we've been doing that for 10, 11 years now, all-day kindergarten, so that was a big one. Technology, hello. When I first started, and John can tell you, we had these huge desktop computers for teachers that still had the discs.
Did you play Oregon Trail on them?
Tony used to play it all the time. And by the way, my husband had Mr. Slater as a teacher as well.
Your son-in-law?
My son-in-law,
Your daughters?
my 2 oldest daughters. The youngest one won't have him unless he's coming back. But technology, attitudes of parents, attitudes of kids has changed greatly in these years. Expectations. Kindergarten is now first grade is now second grade, has greatly changed. The responsibilities that we have, even more so.
So kids have to learn more at an earlier age than they did before.
Yes.
Do you find then that parental involvement then has increased? Because I imagine that, needing to educate kids, or is that one of the major hurdles that you have then?
Parental involvement has decreased. Before we would have parent helpers all the time in our rooms, everything. Most parents are both working. So we don't have that. Are busy. They just are busy. And so a lot of it is just put on us. You have great parents that do. There's a lot of parents that are involved, but we have more and more that are not involved like they used to be.
Zach, many people here are from LaPorte. They might not know about Pine Elementary in Michigan City. Tell us a little bit about your school.
So Pine is a fine arts magnet school. It's not really a magnet. It functions sort of differently. We have about 465 students, and we take our boundary kids first. So it's about 80-ish% free and reduced lunch. It changes about every day. It's maybe it hovers around 40% white, 30% black, multi and Hispanic make up the rest for the most part. We house 2 sections of students with moderate and severe disabilities, and so we have that program in our building. So that's the arts part of it. We take all of the boundary kids, and then the magnet part says if we have room left over, there's a lottery. So we take kids to do certain arts integration activities. we have that integration with our curriculum, but then there's also extra funding for lots of after-school programs. So we do piano and violin. We have theater. We have dance, those sorts of things. So they've invested in the arts at the school. So that's something different about what Pine is in Michigan City.
And you've been a principal for 2 or 3 years?
This is my third.
Third year. So you're finding your groove now, right?
Trying.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
What are some of the biggest hurdles? Because I feel like each school has their own challenges typically. What are some of your biggest hurdles at Pine?
Yeah, so sort of logistically, we turn over almost 50% of our kids every year. So I think last year hovered right around 40, a little bit more than 40%.
What does that mean, turnover?
So next year I'll have basically half of my school will be brand new kids. So the transiency is, since December of this year, we've done about 36 new students in. I don't know what the outs are, but so we're sort of constantly turning over students. We have the homeless shelters. Some of the homeless shelters, we pull those students. We pull from the prison neighborhoods, so that turns over quite a bit, and then it's West Side neighborhood. So it's sort of this cycle of families that come through. So I think one of the biggest hurdles is that. On top of it, it's poverty. You know, when you're talking about 80-ish% free and reduced lunch, you have all these kids that are moving in and out, and they're also living in poverty. And so it becomes just sort of difficult to gain traction with students and families when that cycle's happening.
So, John, you taught for 40, how many years? 40 couple?
Do the math.
Okay, I'm not doing the math.
43.
That's why I became a pastor. What were some of the biggest things that changed from the time that you, I mean, obviously quite a bit, but at the end there, I mean, what were you seeing that was really, I guess, problematic for you in the changes? You know what I mean?
Well, one of the changes, obviously, is when I taught your grandfather, it was a one-room schoolhouse. And so, along with Krissy, most of the same answers, but there's a couple things I want to go back to really. One of the things that I've really noticed is I'm with Krissy. Most of the parents are not involved, but there's a certain segment of the parents, the helicopter parents, that are involved in every. Not loud enough?
I think they turned you off because you kept on hitting the mic, the table. So
So.
you can turn him back on. He's promised not to hit the table with his microphone.
Or the guy next to him.
Or me. Well, you can hit me. That's fine. It doesn't make as much
Sorry
of a noise.
about that. I can hear it. So the helicopter parents on the other side want to know everything and are there all the time and won't let their kids grow up. So there's that problem too. And that's something I didn't see at all when I first started teaching. And it seemed to be getting, at least in the 5th grade, worse each year. The other thing, and I mentioned about kids and how they've changed, and there's a good thing and a bad thing about it. They're getting bigger. And I really like basketball and volleyball, so that's a really good thing. On the other hand, the really problem is they're getting bigger. There's an awful lot of children that are very, very overweight. And it seems to be an incredible problem, and there's so many reasons why. Technology being one of them, lack of gym class. At our school, we did away with sports. There's just all kinds of issues. Do you want me to tell them the walking story?
We have sports again.
Yeah, I know sports is back. In fact, Janie and I were so dedicated to sports that we actually coached sports when there wasn't sports at Rolling Prairie.
Yes, they did.
So tell that story about your walking.
Yeah, so I decided, you can talk about it, but you should do something about it. And Janie, my wife, was my unpaid aide. So we talk about all of our situations, and we realized that our kids were in really, really bad shape. So we decided to take them on a walk every day. And so we would pick them up right after lunch recess. We really weren't wasting any time. And there was a trail behind the school that was a half-mile long. And I thought, man, we'll pick those kids up, we'll walk them around that trail, and we'll get a half-mile every day. And actually, one of the years we had Route 66. Our goal was to walk 2,448 miles so that, am I coming through or not?
No, you're good.
Okay.
You're great.
So that it was sort of a goal to get that mileage for the whole group of kids. And we had to walk every day, no matter what, unless it was raining and lightning. And so to the story, you would not believe how many notes I got from parents that their kid could not walk that distance. Doctor excuses. Go to the office to get inhalers. Protesting to me, and I'm like, kids, I would have died for a teacher to take me out for a walk. You're not in class, man. So, and I could see it really was straining them. You'd look at them, and this was August and September when we started, sweat's rolling down their face, they're complaining. But lo and behold, after about 2 months of walking, we could start to see a little bit of conditioning. And the kids started to like the walking and really enjoyed it, started to walk or talk along with the walking. And by the end of the year, they were in so much better shape. And just little things like that make an amazing difference.
Hey Nate, can I jump in? You were asking about changes. I think one of the largest shifts that I've seen, and Michelle Borba synthesizes the research on this. She says basically over the past few decades that there's been about a 40% increase in narcissism among students, and in that same time there's been that same decrease in empathy. So we get this gap in more narcissistic, less empathetic students. I think when you add on top of that screen time, so the average 8 to 10-year-old, it's 6 hours, 11 to 14, it's 9 hours a day, daily. So you put those two things together, and you have narcissistic, non-empathetic kids that don't know how to socialize. So they can't play together. They don't know how to collaborate with each other. They have no imagination. You know, all that stuff sort of goes by the wayside. Even the studies on children's books now, when they run the word counts through those, it's more I's and me's than ever before. So the study on sort of, you know, you have these kids, it's all about me, narcissism, and it's less about everybody else. And on top of that, I don't know how to negotiate conversations. And you're in a school setting where you have to do that all day. I think there comes this sort of big problem with kids' ability to interact with each other, with adults. And so I think that's a big shift that's happened and a big problem in schools.
Do you see the same thing?
So, yes, and I wanted to go back to a couple things. Rolling Prairie, even though everybody thinks it's a nice country school, and it is a wonderful country school. It's a beautiful, I mean, our kids went there, I teach there, I love it. We are over 50% free and reduced at Rolling Prairie. We have a 20% ELL population, and we have in and out
real quick,
all the
what's
time.
ELL?
English language learners. English language learners. So we have 20%. We have transient. We have migrant farmers. And so we deal with the same in and out, in and out, in and out. And so, and when people, and we have over 500 kids in our school of K through 5. So people think we're not big. We're enormous. We're absolutely enormous. And I see the same thing. So in kindergarten, we changed some things this year. My kids have to greet each other at the door every morning. I have one of my students, and it rotates around, every different student every day, and they have to shake hands, look each other in the eye, and say, good morning, how are you? Because they do not know how to socialize. They do not know how to problem solve. Because nobody is teaching them these things anymore. I had one just 2 days ago say, I can't see, but he just sat there like this. And I said, what could you do to solve that problem? Move my chair? Yeah, good job. Kiss your brain. That's a great answer. Move your chair. And but they don't know. They don't know how to do that social. So we also we are a one-to-one school corporation, which means everybody has some kind of technology. We all have iPads in New Prairie. My kindergartners, all 3 kindergarten classes, are only on those iPads during the day for about a half hour total. And that's 15 minutes in the morning and about 15 minutes in the afternoon. That's it. The rest is movement, differentiated instruction, some paper pencil because I got to see them right. But we're moving and we're grooving. We also have added in a social interaction playtime because they don't know how to play with each other anymore, or people, or even how to be empathetic. So we constantly say every day, I am kind, you are kind, we are kind.
So this is really interesting to me because we've been talking about this at my kids' elementary and trying to figure out, right, it's not just teaching math, it's not just teaching, spelling in English. We're talking about teaching like virtue and teaching social skills and things like that. But how do you program that stuff, Zach, as a principal and an administrator?
You program that stuff.
How do you do that?
You program that stuff. I mean, you have to, because here's what happens. I mean, I think largely, and this is generalization for sure, it's middle-class white America teaching sort of diverse, not middle class America. And so there's this gap in understanding of you should be able to be respectful because I said so, or because that's the way I was raised. And so there's this gap in understanding of actually that student doesn't have any idea how to be respectful unless you explicitly teach them. And so on the teacher side, it's understanding that those students actually have to be explicitly taught how to look somebody in the eye, how to shake their hand, how to sit in a seat, how to walk in a hall. And so, again, I think the middle class sort of mentality on that, and that's largely what the teaching population is, thinks kids should just be able to do it. And so there's an understanding on we have to build the capacity of the teachers to say, if you want them to do it, you have to teach it explicitly. And so that's, for us in our building, it's that conversation and that training and that expectation all the time. The kids doing, those behaviors are happening because we haven't explicitly taught a different behavior. And so that understanding is really difficult for adults. And once you can understand that, then obviously it translates into the students. So I think there's sort of that progression through from teachers to students.
So we hear a lot about this idea of Common Core. What is Common Core?
It's not new really anymore. It's the state standards. Well, Indiana has different standards, the Common Core. They're basically the exact same, but Indiana wanted to be slightly different. So it's the standards that students are assessed on right now, 3rd to 12th grade basically, but it's going to trickle down to kindergarten, probably next year.
We already do what's called the NWEA, which is just a preemptive to it.
So why the change in standards?
The biggest shift in the standard now, it's more processing and reasoning skills are being taught and assessed. So even now on the new iLearn, which will be brand new this year, you could get the math wrong on a test, but if your reasoning is right, you're going to get equal credit. So the value is in problem solving and reasoning as much as it is actual content. So so that's the shift. I think largely because the jobs that those kids are going to have don't even exist yet. And so before you could prepare for what the job market was going to be, you can't necessarily do that now. So students have to have the ability to process and reason to get the jobs that are necessary when they graduate.
John, did you then, did you see a lot of this when you were teaching as well, kids not knowing social, emotional things, and did you have to teach that, or is that something that they're experiencing now that you didn't necessarily in your career?
Certainly was getting worse each year, and we tried to do some things that would help. I don't think I really had a curriculum as such you're talking about, but involving, the last 5-6 years of teaching, maybe the last 10 years of teaching, started in going to much more activity based, even in math class, to get kids to work together, to get kids to interact with each other, to get kids to solve problems and things together. So the narcissism you were talking about is an obvious thing that's really come up in the last 10 years, would you say? Yeah.
And is there a connection to technology? Why the increase in narcissism? I mean, is there any, Zach, you're pretty, you stay on data pretty closely. Is there any connection that they know yet, or what are you seeing?
I mean, you can read a lot of different sort of research on this. A lot of it, sure, it's social media driven. It's the selfie culture, and so a lot of that sort of is pervasive. It's sort of trickled down to our 7, 8, 9-year-olds are carrying phones at school, and that's happening at that level. So I think there's certainly a connection in that sort of way. I think just the way society functions, and that's a much larger conversation. I think it's gone to that mentality for adults as much as it has for kids.
It's just a trickle-down kind of thing. We're just more narcissistic as a culture, and our kids have... Yeah, okay. And we'll get to your questions here in a second, but I do want to talk about something, because this is... You may have seen it in the news if you've been paying attention to what is happening. Obviously, we just started a new legislative year here in the state of Indiana, and we've got one of our reps here, Jim Presso. Thanks for being here, Jim. But Jim and his fellow state reps and state senators are just now starting a new legislative season, and one of the things that they've been talking about is teacher pay and education reform. I didn't know this, and maybe some of you guys do, but you guys, educators, now Zach, you're not in this because you're a principal now, but you were an educator before a principal. You guys get incentive pay at certain things.
Only if there's money. You want to get like a highly effective score on your stages, and if there's some money, then you can get what's called a bonus.
Yeah,
You get to wear jeans on Friday. That's our bonus. We love it. You get a bonus, but only if there's money, only if there's extra money, so it's not a guarantee.
Does the state give you that money, or does the school system give you that money?
The state, and so you never know how much it's going to be.
Does every school get the same amount of money?
No.
So how do they determine who gets the money?
Good question. If you live in Indianapolis or Carmel, you do very well.
I did just ask a teacher right before what that was bonus. I had a highly effective teacher in my building. It's like $500 or so. That's what it was last year.
And it's
year to year,
and it's
but
taxed
that's what the bonus
at a
was.
higher rate because it's considered bonus. So you only get about 50% of it.
So I did some research on this, on the merit bonuses, and as Krissy says, last year educators in Carmel received a $2,422 bonus.
Mine was $700, and I'm highly effective.
And Zach, your highly effective teacher at Pine received what?
$534.
Don't tell my husband.
He's not listening. We're fine. And I in this article I was reading, one of the schools in Indianapolis that's a high poverty school, their teachers got $42. 42. What does that do, Zach, for you as an administrator? How to attract quality teachers when you could go to a school in a more affluent area and get, I mean, that's a fairly significant difference, $2,400 compared to $40. Do you think that's a pretty serious problem? I mean, to me, it seems like it.
Yeah, I think so. Sort of the problem is just attracting educators in general. You know, I have 8 brand new teachers just this year in my building. Statistically, in 5 years, half of them will be gone. That's sort of the rate of
Indiana's
turnover.
not real good at this anyway.
Right.
We're not a good state at keeping teachers.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, really, honestly, it's people that want to be in that situation. I mean, I'm drawing into a higher poverty sort of difficult situation, and so you're just upfront about that. If you're called into that sort of area, then you're going to come in and fit in really well here. And so that's the attraction, is you just really have to have this desire to do it.
Because you can't, so to me, and this is just me, I know I'm on an island here, but it seems to me that schools that are in higher poverty areas might have more issues because of poverty, because of all these kind of things, just in trying to help children have, some stability, these kind of things. And it seems to me then that the class sizes ought to be smaller in there because you have to have more specialized care for each student. But that is not the case, though, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, ours fluctuate year to year, but it's mid-20s. Right now, 6th grade is 30. So
you have a class of 30 kids?
Sure. I have two sections. They each have 30. 5th grade's mid to high 20s
Does
right
each
now.
Teacher
it changes every day.
Does each teacher have an aide?
No.
Is there any aides?
So there's our Title I dollars pay for instructional assistants. So there's 7 right now, 6, but hopefully hiring a 7th instructional assistant. So they have other responsibilities than just in the classroom too. So they're sort of the breakfast duty, the lunch duty, recess duty, but they also are pulling groups of students to do intervention work. But there's I think I have 31 classroom teachers in the building. So with the 7 of them, they're not assigned. I mean, it just doesn't work out to assign them to a classroom. They're largely pulling students for interventions.
That's what we have as well. We're a full Title I school as well, and we have instructional assistants through Title I. Not every teacher has their own. It's usually one shared between all the grades. Kindergarten and first are fortunate to have a couple extra, just because we have those little people. But our 5th grade is usually around 30 people, 30 kids. And I'm 25. All of our kindergartens are 25 each this year. Sometimes we go to 4 sections, and then we usually have about 22 when we have 4 sections of kindergarten. But he's in the 20s, 20 to high 20s.
And I was looking, John very graciously gave me a yearbook from when I was in 5th grade that he had. And I was looking there, and that was one of the things I noticed, John, was the class sizes were a little bit smaller back then, actually. I mean, they were still 20, but they weren't 30. Did you see that in your career, just increasing class sizes, or?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. We had teacher negotiations on class size. I don't know, is that sort of fizzled now with the unions?
Yeah, the only thing we can negotiate is our pay.
That's what I thought, so I'm 7 years out. So we did have negotiated a class size, and it was very reasonable. But when I first started teaching, I had some classes, this had been in the 70s, I had some classes middle 30s.
Wow. And there's a big difference, right, between...
Oh, there's a huge difference. And in fact, our school now, the classroom, I think, is really built, I would think I was told, for 24, because there's 24 lockers. The lockers are in the room. And boy, if you start putting 30 into the classroom, it becomes very difficult to get around. And
So, John, what teacher pay, right? This has been a thing for quite some time. You're retired now. You don't have to negotiate your salary anymore, except with me, and I don't pay you anything.
you're about the same as the state.
Yeah, I was going to say, what are some of the things that you saw as an educator about teacher pay? Did you get raises often? Did you, what did you see?
In the middle 70s to about 2,000 teacher pay. And of course, I was on an increment system, which means you automatically got a certain amount of raise, not a big raise, but
What are you talking, 2% maybe?
$700-800, depending on what your
Okay.
salary is. And then you would also get a percentage raise as you negotiated. In the 2000s, it's become much more difficult. I think the last few years that I taught, that was during the Depression, 2008 to whatever, there was no raises. We were lucky they didn't they actually did take some things away. So there's definitely been a loss in salary compared to what I had, say, 20 years ago. And it's not just salary. There's also a loss, I think, of respect from some of the state politicians. And, Jim, I'm not talking about you.
Get him!
But there's been a lot of negativity, especially from a couple of our governors. So when you have a situation of not good pay and this negative feeling, sometimes it's hard to go to work.
It is. We became the scapegoat.
We
became the scapegoat for everything that they thought was wrong, which really wasn't. But
So did you want
we
to
went
comment?
for 8 years, John. I think we went 8 years without a raise. My base pay stayed the same for 8 years. But we pay for our insurance and everything, so that all went up. So I made less money. And this year's our first year.
I want to make sure people hear that. You made less money for 8 years to teach.
Yes. And I don't, and then, we don't, we are fortunate at our school. We get $125 in April, end of April, and I can choose what I want for $125 for my classroom for the whole next year. So I have to decide what I think I'm going to use. And that's it. So anything else I want for my classroom, thank you, Tony, comes out of my pay. I'm scoping out the pencils here, actually. I'm thinking how many I could fit in my purse. So we are fortunate for that we have that we get to at least buy some supplies. The rest come out of our own pockets. We also, and your school is the same, have a very high poverty rate. So we buy clothes, we buy shoes, we buy backpacks, we buy lunch boxes, we pay for lunches, we pay for school supplies that they don't have. And that all comes out of our pockets. We pay for all that.
Zach, and you can get to what you're saying, but real quick. But I think that's a great point. What are some of the barriers that you have in education, just like Krissy was talking about, that aren't just, okay, kids, now it's time to learn. You have to do lots of things before you even get to that point, right?
Yeah, well, I think what I was going to say, and what maybe answers this question partially too, I think teachers, sort of the pressure that exists for them from outside of the profession is large. And if you consider that class of 30 students, there's probably, statistically, there's 3 kids that are going to have a mental illness, like actual mental illness. There's probably 3 or 4 that have an individualized education program. There's probably statistically 1 or 2 that are on a behavior plan. So you're walking into maybe a 5th grade class that has kids that are functioning at a 2nd grade level through probably 8th, 9th, 10th grade level. You have kids that are probably students with autism, or we have students that are ODD or have screen dysregulation disorder, or all those types of things. And your job is to make sure that they can pass this test that are these standards that are put out there. When they walk in the door, well, we're feeding them breakfast now, so they have at least breakfast, but they've had the same clothes on for several days, and they may have wet the bed the night before, and they didn't have food. All of those sorts of things are happening, and no kid is no kid's going to learn if they don't look okay, if they don't smell okay, if they're not well fed, and those types of things. So it's the same thing that exists where teachers are doing all of that. We're sending food home on the weekends. All of that kind of stuff is happening. We're giving uniform. We're actually washing students' clothes at school right now. So a kid comes in and we notice 3 days in a row it's the same stuff, and I'm taking it back to the cafeteria because we have a washer and dryer, and we're washing clothes. And so again, if I come in and I know I'm dirty or I know I smell bad, I'm concerned about that all day. I'm not concerned about whatever it is that you're teaching me. So you have to get past all of those types of things before you can ever educate kids. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, John, John had a great program that he ran at LaPorte, or at Rolling Prairie, that I mentioned in his biography. But this, I think, is a symptomatic of a lot of things that often happen in education. So, John, you can maybe tell that story.
So decided that I was going to start a tutoring program for a lot of reasons, and dealt with a lot of kids that Zach was talking about. And there was a couple of reasons started the program. I really wanted to see if I could actually develop a program where I could get everyone to function in 5th grade math. And I certainly wanted to help those students that were really, really struggling. And did it for 6 years. The first year was horrible. We did some adjustments, and then it became pretty darn successful. And by the last 3 years, everyone in our 5th grade was passing ISTEP tests, everyone. I think we had 99%, 100%, 99%. And to the pay, which is the interesting story. I did not set the pay. I went an hour and a half early to school each day, and I was paid $37.50 a day to do it, $25 an hour, which was fine with me. And after a year or two, the assistant superintendent said, and again, this was during the hard times, we're really struggling. Sorry, man. We were really struggling with money, and he said, we're going to have to lower it to $25, but you don't have to come in that first half hour when you prep. And I'm like, do you not get it? I have to come in to prep. So it was $25 still for the hour and a half. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm going to put my hand here so I don't hit it.
There we go.
There you go. So that's fine. The next year, the same guy called up and he said, hey, it needs to be $20 an hour. And I was getting close to retirement again. I'm like, okay. And believe it or not, the last year he said, $10. And I said, I tell you what I'm going to do for you. I'm not going to tell the kids I'm not going to be here tomorrow. And you're in charge. You know what? He called back in the afternoon and he said, you can have your $20. But that's how much they value, and it was a program that everyone knew was good. And
so we're talking a $2,000 investment over the course of the year.
Yes.
To get 10 to 12 kids.
Oh, well, it was actually, many kids came actually through the year. There were 25 to 30 kids.
25 to 30 kids to pass the ISTEP test.
Yes. And other things.
And other things, and they couldn't find money for it?
That's correct.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to talk about real fast. We have you were talking all this sort of about pay and merit pay and all that kind of stuff. I think there's another side to it too, where, or maybe it's sort of the same side. We have a teacher in our district who teaches 6th grade, and he literally passes every single student. I think last year one kid in his 6th grade math class didn't pass. He teaches all the math in that school every year. I mean, he's one of the most phenomenal people that you will meet and you can learn from. So every year this happens, he's passing 99% of his kids every year. Student support services kids, like students, everybody that takes the test over and over and over, right? So he's making the same amount of money that the teacher who's passing 35 or 40% of their kids every year over and over and over. And again, all those barriers exist, and we have to address all of that. But also, here's this person who's like, what's the upside for me? You know, like, I get it. He's dominating, and it's sort of it's seen the same as what everybody else is doing.
All right, so we have lots of great questions that you guys have sent, and please do keep on sending them in. And we're going to get to your questions now, and we'll go from there. So, panelists, you can answer these. Anybody that wants to, but. How has standardized tests like ISTEP impacted the curriculum at the elementary level, and how has the testing impacted the students versus how has it affected the teachers?
I just think it's pressure, like the pressure that exists for both, for teachers' performance, because your school's performance is based on that. And I mean, my daughter's in 3rd grade, and she's already nervous about iRead because she knows it's this big test that she has to pass. I mean, you know, this is what this is what it's come to. We have kids that are nervous and anxious and have anxiety about, I have to pass this major test, because we're assessing one time on this set of standards to tell you whether or not you're a good student or not.
The pressure is immense on the kids, on the teachers, and like Zach said, you have in your classroom 7 IEPs.
What's an IEP?
Individual education plan for those that are some struggles in certain areas. You'll have 4 with emotional disabilities. You'll have 3 that have been bounced around from house to house. But you have to make sure those kids all pass, because not only is it the kids have to pass, you want them to pass, your pay, your school's grade, your corporation. So there is so much pressure to put on a test. A test that does not show you what those kids know.
I would go along with that too. And when I was there, I felt like there was a great amount of pressure on the principal. Do you feel a lot of pressure?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't really a second of the day that I'm not considering that, because I'm going to be assessed based on all those things. And then the perception is, you know, what's your school letter grade, and that's sort of how we're going to judge you. And so that weighs on you every day, for sure. When we had conferences, a lot of time, teachers' meetings, there was the strategies of what we were going to do. And the principal, and she was a great principal, she was really concerned that we were going to meet those goals and that we were going to get the right grades. And we didn't want to be an F school. And it's really tough. Right.
Whoever came up with the grades.
Not a big fan.
Not
at all.
The new assessment, like if you go online, look at iLearn. I mean, all this stuff is out there now. But the 5th grade English Language Arts section, what they're asking kids to do now, it's called a performance task. They're giving them 4 passages. They have to synthesize the information in across all 4 passages and do writing tasks with them. Some are shorter questions, but one longer. So before it was like you read this, you're answering right there questions, and now it's literally 4 texts that they're reading and synthesizing information into sort of come up with this research question that they have to answer. And even in 3rd grade, it's multiple passages. It's only 2. But once you get to 5th grade, you're talking 4. I mean, I could hand that to you all, and it would be difficult for us to process.
I don't even know what synthesizing information is. So.
And don't think that K-1-2 is out of it, because in New Prairie and every school corporation we have to do what's called NWEA. And we have to show growth on that to a certain amount. And if we don't meet it, we have to set goals, and we don't meet those, then you're not effective as well. And that test encompasses anything from kindergarten to 2nd grade. So my kindergartners could be answering some 2nd grade questions. So it's not easy either.
Krissy, I'm sure for you too, it all depends too if a child has been through preschool or not, and so you have kids probably coming in, and at the
I
first.
run the gamut. I have those that are already starting to read, and I have those that don't even know they have a name, and what the letters are in their name. So we have every extreme, trying to get them ready for first grade, and then so what we do at Rolling and New Prairie is we have balanced literacy, and balanced math, so that we are addressing each one at their own levels and doing differentiated instruction. So it's not like you just get to come in and teach one thing.
So it's so ridiculous to be grading schools because they're not the same. You just can't compare them. Anyone with any common sense, if you would walk and look at some of the schools in South Bend and then compare it to the neighbor school, Penn, how can you judge them and give them this? It's beyond belief.
I have written and emailed everybody down at the state, please come and
Yes.
spend a week in our school or 3 days and see what we do, because they make all of these decisions without stepping a foot into schools
it's easy
of
to
different
tell you what to
schools.
do.
In fact, Jim, this is way before your time, I'm sure.
No, you could throw them under the bus. It's fine.
One of them had the audacity to ask why we had to have snow days up here. They had no idea that we had snow up here
But don't they cancel school if there's like a strong frost
down there. Yeah, and we're like 4 to 7 inches. We can 2-hour delay. We'll make it. I mean, yeah. So
What has this done? So you've got grades for schools, okay, and they just came out, I think, actually not too long ago. Yeah, grades for schools. You also have open enrollment in Indiana. Is that used often as a competitive thing then? Like to say, okay, go to this school instead, they're an A school. Instead of this school, it's a B school. Do you see that, Zach? Are you guys getting a lot of people that are leaving Michigan City schools, or?
So yeah, I mean, there's competition now everywhere. So school districts that aren't Michigan City, the surrounding school districts, will advertise to our students at the high school level, middle school level, and it trickles down to elementary. When like the honor roll lists come out, those parents will get mailings from the surrounding districts to ask for those kids to come to that district.
So you're saying that schools send out mailers to your honor roll kids to come to their school now?
Yeah, so it's super competitive. Yep.
New Prairie doesn't send those out.
Do you want to throw them under the bus? Which ones are they? Yeah.
Oh my God.
Get your pitchforks, guys.
No, but it's happening. It's certainly happening.
What has open enrollment done to Michigan City schools?
I mean, enrollment has declined over the past few years. This year, it's actually increased again. I think largely the programs that exist and some of the offerings, especially at the high school level. Dual credits, we have more dual credit offerings than almost anybody in the area. And kids are graduating high school with associate's degrees, and there's some different academies that exist that are super top notch. And I think that momentum has brought families back. There's a Promise Scholarship there, so if you own a home in Michigan City, it pays $5,000 or $6,000 to your if you go in state college, that sort of thing. So. It has leveled, but then so what it does cause is families think, well, I'm going to go to Westville or New Prairie or LaPorte, and it's going to be better there, and so they leave, and then they spend 2 months there, and they're like, oh, it's not really better, and then they come back, and so now you have this, we see this bouncing effect where they're back and forth, and they'll try it here and they go there, and so if you look at the research on that, it's terrible for kids. Any move sets them back, and so that's really
That's
difficult.
what we found. We have open enrollment. We've actually had to close our open enrollment this year for all the elementary schools because we were full. I mean, over 500 kids. But we have found that they usually, not, for the most part, not all, but most of the open enrollment is they've had a problem with a teacher or a principal at another school. So they think they're going to come to another school, and it's going to be different, except for it's usually not the teacher or the principal. It's the student or the family or whatever. So it's not better, and then you're dealing with trying to get those problems solved as well. Plus, they have to provide their own transportation. When you're out of district and you do open enrollment in New Prairie, there's no bus that's going to come get you. So a lot of times then they're tardy or they're missing school.
Westville sends 2 buses to the Walmart parking lot in Michigan City and buses kids from that parking lot to Westville.
And in South Bend, I believe LaVille and John Glenn do the same thing. How much money transfers with each student when they go from one school corporation to another?
That's changed. So it used to be there was a count at the beginning of the year, and then the money was set. So what would happen is kids would be in a certain place, and if they transferred after that date, the money stayed at the school where they started at. So we would get, so what happens for me is tax time, there'll be a big influx of kids. There's sort of a big shuffle of kids. So previous to what's happening currently, if the kids weren't there with us at the beginning of the year, we didn't get any money for them. So I could gain 50 kids and no funding for those 50 kids. Now there's 2 counts. So at least there's a beginning of the year count and a middle year, it's in February count that offsets some of the movement of kids. Especially with certain private schools, they would hold the kid until after the count date and then put them out, and we would take them in and not get any of the funding. And that was sort of the pattern of, if we're being really honest, that's just what would happen.
So about how much money is it, Loa, per year? Is it 7,000?
I don't know the it's in that range somewhere between 6.5 and 7.5, I think, is what it is.
And the reason I ask, I see each year that South Bend is losing several hundred students, so you're talking big time money.
Yeah, when I those years I taught in Gary every year when they were losing students, they ended up, I think they're still $20 some odd million, and so that's all enrollment. Those kids leave, the money goes with them, and then you're left with teachers that you can't pay and buildings that you can't fill.
Right.
So with all that good news,
But we do love teaching, I promise.
no, this is a great question. Getting good quality teachers is really important, and we've talked already that Indiana has a hard time keeping teachers. For those, this is a question that came in, for those that are thinking about becoming teachers, what advice would you give them? Yeah, go ahead, Krissy.
Me?
Yeah.
You'll love it. It's just relax. Take every day, one day at a time. Enjoy it. Use humor. Humor is my game in kindergarten. And enjoy it. Just enjoy the kids. Don't worry about all the other stuff, even though you have to. It's kind of hard not to. But it really is the best job there is. There really is. But I understand, because you can't live. Had I been a single mom with just my 2 older girls, had not had Tony, as a teacher, I would have qualified for free and reduced lunch and textbook assistance. That's how much money a professional is making as a teacher. So I know it's hard, but it is worth it. It is worth it.
So I did live that. My family was on Hoosier and all that because when I was teaching, just because of the amount of money that teachers don't make.
So yeah, you technically, according to the state, you were a teacher, but you qualified as in poverty.
We were also in poverty, right, Monica?
I think so. I have conversations with people about that a lot. We have people that come in to sort of observe and that sort of thing. And I honestly think if you're not really passionate about it, you shouldn't do it. Again, the burnout rate is 50% of my new teachers will be gone in 5 years. If you're a student support services or special ed teacher, it's like under 2 years now is the burnout. So,
I'm sure there's moments and seasons where your passion has to be the thing that's fueling you, right?
Yeah, and I think what's changed is you don't have people that are 40-year teachers. Hopefully I'll be at this place for the next 30 years, and because I think there's lots of value that comes with that. But I think what generally happens is you don't get those people that come and stay anymore. You get, I'm going to do this for a short time, and either I don't like this profession, I'm leaving, or I'm going to bounce to another place that I think is going to be better.
But I agree with Zach. If you don't have the passion, it is the only thing that gets you through. At times, it truly is your passion for kids and nothing else.
I would agree, too. I love teaching. Passion's really important. The one thing I would tell students, besides what was already said, is teacher mobility is not very good. So you need to find a corporation you want to be in because I think it's still difficult, isn't it?
No, because you don't, there's no extra pay for years of like, if I taught 18 years and I wanted to go to Pine, they don't have to pay me necessarily anything for my 18 years.
So when I was teaching mobility, it was almost impossible. Schools would prefer to hire someone at a lesser amount. In other words, a rookie teacher. So you basically couldn't move. So you really needed to find a corporation you wanted to be in because that's where you're going to be. Has that changed some, Zach, or not?
I think only because there's a shortage of teachers now. So if I have applicants, the district offers a certain number of years that I can honor on the pay scale. It's not 18, but there are some. So it's more than 5. I think it's 7 or 8, actually. So with the shortage, I think you have to be willing to have those options open.
The last time I was on a selection committee, we had maybe 100 applications, and principal and super said you could pick out whatever 5 or 6 you wanted to talk to and interview, 1 year experience or less.
Which is kind of crazy because you think if you're at the high school level and you say, okay, this teacher over here at John Glenn wants to move into LaPorte, their scores are fantastic. They're a great math teacher. They've been teaching for 20 years, but because they're going to be too expensive.
Too much money.
That's different.
Unless they coach basketball.
That's the way. That's the way.
Basketball or football.
That's the way it used to be.
Yeah, like science and math now, they're negotiating contracts at the high school level because there's a shortage. So
because
actually,
it's desperate. Okay.
Yeah, so the teacher can there's some negotiation that's actually happening on that level,
Awesome.
or a business I don't know business per se, but there's certain areas that are harder to hire. So those people have more leverage.
They have a little more
at
negotiating
the high
power,
school level for sure.
Okay, let's talk about parents. We've got some parents, obviously, in here of elementary kids. What is the best kind of help a parent of a student can give?
I have some parents out here in the audience. You know what? First of all, just basic life skills. You don't know how many kindergartners or even still tie their shoes. Please teach them how to tie their shoes.
Isn't that why we have Velcro?
Yeah, no. Yes, but you don't really, when you're 21, want to wear Velcro tennis shoes. But self-help skills, putting on a coat, following directions, following through. Schedule. Those kids just need a schedule. They need those boundaries. And those are that in itself would help. But support the teacher. Support the teacher. Don't come home and go, okay, what did your teacher say today? Don't be knocking the teacher. Support the teacher. Because it used to be the child got in trouble at school. Oh, my goodness gracious, you're in double trouble at home. What did you do? Now it's, well, what did the teacher do to make you do that? It's blamed a lot on the teacher now and not the student. Mm-hmm. And so support the teacher. Say, hey, what can I do to help? And I know that we have email, Google Classroom, remind message apps. We used to give out our personal phone numbers, but now our cell phones and everything can be subpoenaed in any kind of court case. So we don't give those out anymore because I kind of like having my cell phone, and they'll take the whole phone. And we get involved in more court cases now than we ever have, which is not fun either. But support the teacher. There's not a lot of teacher support anymore.
You guys have anything to add to that?
I have the same thing that Krissy said, except as a 5th grade teacher, you have to start letting your kids make mistakes. The helicopter parent again, don't, try to make your kids perfect. They're not. Let them grow up.
I would say it's just being social, talking with your kid, especially young kids. Look at the green squishy chair instead of, right? I mean,
they
it's
do.
Just, it's human interaction on the most basic level.
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, they just don't even know this is what they've been given. Instead of go get your pink coat, go put on your blue shoes. They come to kindergarten now not even knowing their colors.
I can add one more thing. As a parent starting in 5th grade and then on, I think really encourage your children to participate in some extracurricular activities, clubs, sports, 4-H, whatever it is. And that's a great way to start some interaction.
Also, part of where social emotional learning happens too, right? I mean, a lot of these things, sports, clubs, is where you learn some of these virtue-based things that we talked about before.
Yep.
How do social media and bullying impact your schools?
So I deal with a lot of cyberbullying. Largely, it's not happening during the school day, but it affects the school day. So the law and all of that suggests if it has a substantial disruption to the school, then the school takes action from it. So, I mean, it's threats, it's intimidation, it's a lot of those types of things are going on pretty regularly. So it's increased, I would say, last 3, 4, 5 years.
Why?
For sure. I think access to technology. Every single kid has a cell phone. Every single kid is playing Fortnite, with all of their friends, and they're talking across devices and that sort of thing. So,
and they have no empathy, or they lack empathy, and
they don't. Also, I think it's impulse control. We see tons of impulsivity, which is symptomatic of the narcissism and the loss of empathy, all that kind of stuff. So they don't have the ability to go like, I'm going to wait to send that. Let me think about it for a second. Instead, it's sent and gone, and there's no taking that
There's
back.
such great data and studies that suggest that the path to success and whether you are successful is whether or not you have the ability to delay gratification. You know what I mean? And that's, I think, part of that is teaching your kids to be able to delay gratification, that you don't have to have that win, you don't have to have that thing, you don't have to have that moment even. So
Yeah, another thing I would say to help, also 2 things, and Taylor will tell you she's tired of hearing me saying this about Claire. Read to your children. Read, read, and read. Let them read. Let them just pretend to make up a story. But read, 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 because you will not be able to do anything in this world without being able to do some reading and understand what you're reading. But also, go outside. Go outside and play. We have what's called Minds in Motion set up up on our stage, because there's this little part in your inner ear called a vestibular. And kids don't go outside and play anymore. They don't go rolling down a hill. They don't do that. And that vestibular controls a lot of their impulse behaviors and everything. So our classes go up and do this Minds in Motion maze where they have to stomp and put that pressure on their feet and roll, do log rolls and things like that. And that shows great help in being able to focus and get work done. But most of these kids have not been outside playing.
Yeah, we do Minds in Motion. We also have a sensory room now, which is new to us. There's not tons of empirical data on how it works, but as far as education is concerned, but for all the impulse control it does. So we have a large amount of students that have scheduled time where we have a treadmill, we have an exercise bike, we have a trampoline, we have some other tactile things that they would deal with. There's a dark room. So all of those kind of things, our occupation and physical therapists will put together a sensory diet, is what we call it. And so those kids are scheduled into that room throughout the day to help impulse control, basically.
So Nate, you asked how education has changed from when I started teaching. Just listen to that. Yeah.
they didn't have that.
I don't think so. When I started teaching, we didn't have special ed.
Really?
Really.
So when I started, so I have 465 kids started this year, and I haven't looked at the data recently, but I had 96 kids on some sort of individualized education program.
Do you think that's good or bad, though?
So I mean,
what's the pluses and negatives?
Does that include speech, as your speech kids
sure,
as well?
Yeah, that's everybody. And I have the moderate population, so that's part of them too. But so the good part is, by law, I'm required to give them those services. So for sure, they're going to get serviced based on whatever their needs are. The model has changed in our building. So it used to be special ed was pull out, pull out, pull out, because we're going to teach them at their level, basically, and then you're never closing gaps. And so we're co-teaching. We're pushing a second teacher into the classroom with those students that need the extra support. So they're getting grade level content with the support of another teacher in the classroom. It's largely, we've had lots of success with it. So there's certainly good things that go with that. Funding becomes the problem because you can't co-teach in every classroom. So then you get into logistics, where I have basically a 50-50 class with students with IEPs and students without, and what point does that tip, and those sorts of things. So I think we have way more students right now that have speech and language IEPs because no one's talking to them. So our kindergartners, it is crazy the amount of kids we service for speech and language.
In my classroom alone, I have 11, 25. 11 out of 25 have speech.
So, and have
language
you seen that
IEPs.
in your 18 years, the
Yes.
difference in
Yes.
speech quality and how...
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And the other side of that's receptive language. So it's not just that they can't form the sounds and do the speaking part of it. It's that they can't process what you're saying to them. So it's the language reception part of it too. So you have the kids that can't understand it, but then they can't articulate it on the back end either. So then you have a big problem.
Read to your children, have conversations with your children. And if you expect that education is only going to happen when our students or our kids are with you guys, then it's going to be a very minimal view of education, right? Educate your kids at home, right?
Absolutely.
Talk about colors, talk about numbers, talk
That's
about...
where it starts.
And
Yeah.
parent.
And parent.
Parent. Because we've become the parents as well. Or we end up parenting the parents on a lot of kids. I get, well, they won't... Now, homework, if any of my kids are listening, is mandatory in kindergarten. But it's not. So, but they'll say, I can't get them to do their homework. They're 5. What are you going to do when they're 13? So, well, they wouldn't put on their coat. They're 5. You're the parent. So they're calling and asking us a lot of questions of how to parent, or messaging us how to parent. So I think, maybe we need to look at some parenting classes, some parenting things in our schools, because parents are not even, they're kind of having a hard time parenting sometimes.
Yeah, we get a lot. Well, I'll get a lot of that where it's like, well, they're at school. Can't you take care of it? No. When I started in Gary, it's probably still happening. They still paddled, and so largely when I would talk to parents, they would say, "Have you paddled them yet?" Your kid is 12. Like, that's not a joke. I'm not kidding. No, he's as big as me. I'm not paddling him. Like,
He might turn this around.
I can't. The first week of school, Miss Hardy, she asked me to come into the hallway, and she said, I need a witness. And I was like, somebody needs a witness. Like, what's she talking about, right? She needed me to watch her paddle somebody. Like, I'm not even kidding you, right? So when you call the parents, they were like, did you paddle? No, I didn't paddle him. So I think it's culturally, for me, that's sort of still the mentality is like, what did you do? And I can't do that in Michigan City, but it's sort of still that same thinking and mentality where,
Yeah, I
Parent,
had
be a,
one
parent.
ask me if I could tell them that their dog passed away. No, I can't even tell my own kids when their animals passed away. I'm not telling them that I'm going to, and that was like at 8 o'clock, or when they got
you
there,
call
8:45.
Tony will do it.
Tony will do it. He
Hey,
doesn't.
your dog's dead. I'll see you.
He's not allowed in my classroom. No, and I said, no, I'm sorry. You'll have to tell them when they come home. I am not going to spend all day with your child, and I've just told them their dog has passed away. And no, I just think they've kind of put, they've forgotten. My job is to teach your child. I'm not their parent, even though we are.
Zach, do you think there's too many kids in special ed, and they may be put there for testing advantages?
So I think if you're talking globally, probably yes. We really filter through RTI. We take our time to make that decision as a committee. If we see a deficiency that we think we can sort of target and solve through student support services, then we'll qualify them. What iLearn has done now is basically taken away most of the accommodations and allowed every kid to get those. So it's not timed anymore. There is no real read aloud part except for on math. So they've taken away the calculator accommodation. So they've sort of leveled that part of it off.
To try to make sure you can't?
Yeah, I think so. I think partially. There's also a shift from RTI to MTSS, which is multi-tiered support systems. And so they're basically saying every kid needs what's good for that kid too. So how are we going to make that happen? And so that's the next shift is, sure, we're qualifying and identifying all these kids, but if what we're doing for them is best practice, we should be doing it for everybody anyway. And so there's this, how are we going to make that happen?
Yeah, I would say, John, compared to when you and I were both, there, RTI has completely streamlined the amount of kids that actually get tested for special ed services.
I will say, so statistically though, 1975, 1 in 5,000 kids were diagnosed with autism. 2014, it was 1 in 68. They think now it's about 1 in 45. And so I think that there are bigger struggles that are happening now. I mean, I have students that are bipolar. I have schizophrenia. I have OCD. I think those are legitimate mental illnesses that exist, and we have to have a plan in place for those kids. And that's happening more and more and more. More oppositional defiance disorder. I talked about screen dysregulation disorder, which is just addicted to screens, basically, is what it is. And students with autism, there's this whole new wave of research about virtual autism, where basically students present the characteristics of autism. When you take away the screen entirely, largely those characteristics disappear. And so, again, we're sort of on the front edge of all of that kind of stuff, but I think kids are really struggling with things, and we need to have those plans in place, but it's less often because we're really good at labeling or understanding if it's a specific learning disability or mild cognitive disability or a moderate cognitive disability. It's these other things that we're trying to navigate: oppositional defiance and OCD and screen dysregulation or bipolar. Or
Zach, on the screen dysregulation, I mean, that goes back to parenting too, right? Because you've allowed your child to have so much access that now it's
an addiction.
Sure. It does change the wiring in their brain with
Sure, and I mean the research on the screen is it's dopamine. So basically, it's the same as if you're on drugs. So if you're going to let the kid do it, they're going to do it because it feels great, because there's dopamine in your body, and that's awesome. And so that's why people are hooked on drugs. It's the same difference. So I think the good thing about that is kids' brains, everybody's brains, the research is new on this too, like with neuroplasticity and all this kind of thing. You can change your brain. You can rewire the way that your brain functions. And so if we can understand some of that for educators and with adults, then we can largely influence the way and the things that we do with kids in classrooms, because it's not fixed. We can sort of change those things for kids.
Let's get to some more questions here. Why do schools in Carmel get more money than schools suffering from poverty, Zach?
I don't know exactly, and I could be wrong. I probably shouldn't start talking about it because I know enough to be dangerous, and that's all. I think a lot of it's the funding structure.
That's when it's really it's fun to talk when we don't know much. That's what I like.
I think it's the funding structure. So like they changed that several years ago, and it has to do with how much the tax collection is. So in places like Carmel, tax collection is going to be super high, so that pot of money is going to exist there. In a place like Gary, it's 50% tax collection, so it's much less money. So I think it has to do with some of the local funding on that and how it works with the state. I don't know for sure.
So if you have a larger tax base, the schools are going to be better funded anyway. So do you think schools in poverty should get more tax money? John, do you think?
I absolutely think so. I mean, obviously, when we have problems with other issues, we pour the money in to solve the problem. But in education, we give the schools and the corporations that have less problems, they get more money. It just really doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree. I mean that.
All right.
Yes. I think it needs to be specific about that money, though. It's not just like, here's more money, do what you want. I think we still have to be accountable to, like, a lot of the services that would, if we could have mental health services, like we're tacking that on with the extra money, and that would, by and large, make a huge deal.
And we have partnered with, New Prairie's partnered with Meridian Services, which would never have been there when you were there. And it sees kids that are having...
so we have Meridian in our building, too.
But we don't have enough. We have a waiting list of kids to see them, and we have one person that comes, and so... So
it's an on-site counsel. We have an on-site counselor.
We have an on-site counselor,
They just hired a second one for our building, so it's the same thing. It's basically a designated individual. Like, we have a counselor in our building, but he's doing so many other things, too, that this person is only seeing kids to do counseling sessions.
That's the same with ours. We have a counselor, then we have this Meridian, but now we have this list long, and so we need another one. And so,
Illinois just went to this idea that every I think elementary, but I don't know if it's every school, but every elementary gets not only a school counselor but also a social worker, because so much of. Do you like that idea? What do you think about that?
We have been. That's been a talk at New Prairie this last year or two, is to get somebody else in there also to help with that social work aspect, because that's what actually our counselor is now doing, and so taking up the time for that. Then seeing kids is working with parents and everything. Yes.
Yeah, we have a social worker 1 day a week, and it's grant funded, so that could sort of disappear at any time. So yeah, the counselor takes on that responsibility. I mean, I can't tell you how many home visits I'm doing to sort of manage the social work aspect of things.
Especially if you're trying to integrate education with the parents, with the parents as well. because that social worker oftentimes deals with home life and what's going on there too, correct? So, is there a better way to assess student progress than we're doing right now?
So at New Prairie, we went to, this year, started professional learning communities. And so every class has PLC time when you're meeting with your grade level and you're planning common formative assessments, which are about every 3 to 5 days. So you know every 3 to 5 days how those kids are doing on what you are teaching on that standard at that time. And so it gives you a better idea of who's getting it. And then when those kids that are not getting it, you, a couple days a week, do what are called success groups. And so a teacher whose class really nailed whatever, let's say, from my world, long vowels, short vowels, they would take those kids that didn't nail those and do some other things to work with that, and then the other teachers, and you rotate them around. And so we have a better handle on who is not getting what we're teaching at the time, instead of waiting a month later. Oh,
So,
they didn't get that.
I have a question for you, Krissy. So how much time then do you spend assessing? It sounds like it would be quite a bit.
No, the common formative assessment is only about a 1-2 minute little blurb.
Per student.
I do it in a small group. Most of them just do it like a small group, so it does not take long. Or you can even do it in a whole group, but kindergartners like to cheat. So,
You should teach 5th grade.
so I do small group, but it doesn't take long at all. Not at all. Yeah, and then they develop, work together to find a plan, and that gets them going before they even come to RTI for us to set those goals and work on what needs to be done.
Yeah, I think when you talk about that ongoing work sample progress, I think that's the way you assess things is in an ongoing way. Are they making progress? Looking at student work samples. The state did a few years ago, they're valuing progress, so they're giving points on the report card for how much progress a student made year to year. That's still too long of a time, in my opinion, so I think it's that ongoing way of assessing.
So this is kind of a new phenomenon. LaPorte on Monday has our first e-learning day, which means our kids will have a technical day at school, but they'll be at home. And so you need to log into a computer and do your Google Classroom, these kind of things. What are your thoughts on e-learning?
We've had it for 2 years.
Yeah.
So, you don't have to add days on to the end of the year when you have snow days, so that's kind of nice. And, we don't require, kindergarten, all the grades don't require the whole thing to be on your iPad. You have the Google Classroom is on your iPad. The teacher puts the assignment out there. You actually have not only just your snow day, but 2 more days to get everything accomplished that's on there. And so it's not that they have to have it done that day. You have 3 days to get it done. And for us, I can speak for like K1, 2, there'll be some writing activities, so it's nothing on your iPad. There'll be reading. There'll be some math. A lot of times teachers will send home an e-learning packet. So if we have an e-learning day, I want you to do this page 1, 2, 3, or do this, and this. And then there's apps that we do have them work on. But they're 15 minutes apiece, 15, 20 minutes, and you have 3 days to do it in. And you just have to check in with the teacher at some point during the day. It could be an email, on Google Classroom or whatever. But I don't mind them at all because they're not all the time.
But do you think your kids are actually learning, or do you think that's just busy work?
On the apps, our iPads are not full of just random apps. They're very good educational apps. That's all we, and they're studied, they're looked into, and yeah, I do most of them. Some of them are going to say, now, every teacher also requires paperwork that they have to bring back, that they have to do. If you had to read a story, you have to read something and write something about it. Every teacher requires some kind of paperwork that has to come back to them to check and see. And I don't mind it. We only have 5 or 6 of them, and then after that we add the days on to the end of the year. So if we've used all 5 of our e-learning days, then we add the days on to the end of the year. And I don't mind it for a short term. I wouldn't want it every day, because then I can't interact with them. Because I think our biggest thing as a teacher is those relationships. If you don't form those relationships with your students, then you're going to have a hard time on those e-learning days or any days. My kids want to do their e-learning because they know it'll make Mrs. Surma happy.
Did you have something?
I want to, not to e-learning, I do want to say something about that, but you mentioned relationships, and largely at Michigan City, there's been a really strong push in the last few years. If that doesn't exist with kids, then it's over, not just in kindergarten, but in 8th and 9th and 10th and 12th grade too. I think that's sort of been lost in society, and so I think that's key. I think the reason that I had success in a classroom is because of the relationships I had with kids, not because I was doing something great or magical in the classroom. I think it's super important. We haven't had an e-learning day yet, so hopefully it doesn't snow next Tuesday and that comes up. Or it could, I guess we're sort of prepared. But we're not one-to-one, so it creates a little bit of a different dynamic.
Isn't either,
Yeah, so then there's like, so do the kids have the devices? Will they log in and get that done? So I'm sort of nervous about that because they do have those days on the back end, but I have to manage at the school level, how am I going to make sure that they can make that work up? So if it is something that's on the computer, I have to have the lab open before or after school or that sort of thing. So it'll be interesting. I think there is some meaningful work that can be done in short bits of time. So e-learning is going to take, an hour and a half or 2 hours of the day. It's not all day. And I think there's some meaningful things that can happen there. Again, I wouldn't want it to be all the time. I think that you just can't replace quality instruction. I think, do you guys do professional development on some of those days?
Yeah, in the fall, we have our first, it's e-learning, but it's called a flex day. And so it's when they practice, the kids practice the e-learning, but we have professional development. LaPorte's doing professional development on their e-learning days. Our e-learning days now are solely, other than our flex day in the fall, are solely just weather.
I think that's a key piece, because if we can build teacher capacity through professional development and have a little bit of more time to do that, it'll impact kids more in a meaningful way. So I see some of ours are built in that way, where that day is professional development for teachers.
All right, just 10 more minutes left, and I've got a ton of questions. But how does school choice, charter schools, private schools affect public elementary schools?
I mean, statistically, charter schools perform basically the same as public, sometimes better, sometimes worse, but there's no real benefit. I mean, if you look at the research at large, some states better than others, but so I think it's sort of negligible there. Sometimes they don't have the same services or same programs, so I think you lose out on some of that.
Public school at all, having charter schools in a community?
I mean, I mean, if you have a group of kids that go to a charter, you're going to lose the funding for that. So I think that'd be the one way I think it affects.
You're losing funding. Do you think you're also losing maybe some of your better students, more talented students, or students that have better parental support because they get them there, and you may be left with? Is that a possibility?
If the charter is doing really well, I think so, but I think largely they're performing basically at the same rate. So,
but sometimes parents think it's better, so they.
I think that's where you get the bounce. They go and realize it isn't and come back.
And then the free choice, likewise, or?
We have, I think, with that open enrollment free choice, we also have the bouncing back and forth quite a bit. So that for the child is a hard thing. It's a very hard thing. But as far as us, you just never know. Am I going to have 25 kids this week, or am I going to have 24? Am I have 26? You just never know. We are about the same of in and out, in and out, in and out.
I did get a text. I don't know who sends these, by the way. I see your phone numbers, but I don't know who. That I do want to correct something earlier. It says New Prairie did send flyers to their LaPorte house about honor roll competitiveness.
Oh, there you go. Well, now we know. That's a new one. So you notice teachers don't always know what the central office does a lot of times.
As a teacher, is it harder to discipline students with mental illnesses?
I think it's situational. Like, that's really hard to answer. Sometimes it's much easier. Sometimes it's much more difficult. It depends on age level, capacity of the student, whatever the mental illness is, what the relationship is with that student. There's so many different factors that go into it. It's really dependent upon the situation.
And the plans that we have in place for them.
We're going to just do a couple more minutes. If you can think of a myth that you'd like to bust with the people here and people listening and watching about elementary public education, or your experience as a teacher or administrator for you, Zach. Think of a myth that maybe you just wish more people knew about that they don't about what you do as an educator? John, do you have one?
Yeah, teaching is easy and teachers don't work.
Teachers work, huh?
Teachers work. Most of the teachers work really, really hard, spend a lot of time before school, after school, and weekends. Yep.
Yeah, I would echo that. Like I usually pull in around 6 in the morning. There are teachers there before me. We don't take kids till 8:15. The nights that I leave at 5:30 or 6, there are teachers there after me, without fail. Saturdays I go in, there's 4 or 5 cars in the parking lot. Sundays I go in, there's 4 or 5, 6 cars in the parking lot. All summer when I'm there, there's teachers there. The investment in the time and the energy, it isn't like, oh, I came at 8, I left at 3, and I didn't do anything else. It just totally doesn't exist that way.
I would go with the same thing. Our actual hours are 7:55 to 8:25. I'm there at 7:30 because I also have a first grader, so I don't want to get her up that early. But we don't leave until closer to 5 most of the time, and our summers are not off. We're doing professional development. We're attending conferences. I teach summer school. You're doing many things, and we don't get paid during the summer. Everybody thinks we get paid for not teaching. You don't. You get a paycheck because they split it up so that you're not going those 3 months without a paycheck. But we don't get paid
You take
for
9 months of pay.
We get
over
9
12
months of pay over 12 months. But we're doing, I'm giving up hours and hours of professional development, and you don't get paid for that, for training. You'll go South Bend, over in Chicago for training over the summer, and you don't get paid for those hours.
Any other myths that you can think of that is important for people to know about what you do? Or what you did, John?
We really want every child to succeed. We are not out to get anybody's child. We really want everybody to succeed. And I think some people think that that's not the case, but we really do.
Let's say you're here and your kids aren't in elementary anymore. How can they help you guys? How can the community help you guys?
I think there's some of the obvious, like time. We have tons of people that come in and tutor, help out, those sorts of things. We're forever collecting, uniforms or hygiene thing, stuff like that. So there's money. It's the same. Talent, money. I think those sorts of investments.
Yeah, same. Come in and read with kids and peer mentors. We have a lot of kids that do not have a family or adults that are there for them. So peer mentors, coats, boots, clothes.
Same thing. 5th grade, I had several people come in and mentor, and it's hard to explain how valuable it is to those kids. A lot of them just don't have any family at all. And also just helping with school projects. I was looking at Jim Pressel and thinking about all the help that he did with our environmental trail. Pretty much just said, hey, I'll do it.
So we'll end with this. Thank you so much for being here. But the last question that we have, and we'll end with this one, is the question we ask at the end of every discussion over dinner is, Krissy Surma, what brings you hope?
At school or just all together?
Both, either, doesn't matter, whatever.
Well, first of all, my family, because they have cut more lamination than anybody should ever have to cut in their entire life, and not complained about it, maybe a little, but not a lot, and have built things for me and made things for me and listened to me just cry over a student. But my kids, my classroom gives me hope every single day. Because every day is a new day with them. You never know what they're going to say. You never know what they're going to do. But they give me hope because I have a great class, and I have wonderful parents that support them, but not all of them. And those kids still come to school wanting to get hugs and loves and learn and everything. So, it's right there. It's all right there.
Zach, what brings you hope, buddy?
Yeah, I think it's those same things where I think the hope is always that you're impacting young lives, and largely you don't ever know what that impact is, and the hope is that you are making a difference. I got an email recently from a kid I taught in Gary who's now a teacher in Munster, and it was that like, hey, loved your class, you made an impact, however many years later, and that's one kid, and that will keep you going forever, So I think that the hope is that it really does make a difference. You don't always hear it. You don't always know it. It's thankless largely for teachers. But the hope is that you're making a difference for kids.
John, what about you, buddy? What brings you?
The same thing. And I've lived a little bit longer, so I've had a chance to talk a lot of my former students and to hear those things. And it makes you feel wonderful. And you know that you've done something good. And you never know what people are going to turn out. Some kids that I had one kid that I never thought was even going to make it through high school is now a doctor. I've had kids do amazing things. I never expected. This person I knew in 5th grade that he'd be a minister.
Sounds really smart and handsome.
But
And
not
he
a
was then
baseball
too. He had that
player.
going for him. And actually, he brought up the yearbook picture. And Janie and I looked at it. He had hair too in 5th grade. Pretty much he was rocking it. Yeah.
God's gift. I take care of it.
But my husband coached him in Little League. Not a ball player.
Oh. Can I?
How about answer questions that come to you, Krissy, and not answer extra things? I was like Jose Canseco of T-ball.
I coached him also.
There were a lot of questions about how I was as a student that I didn't give you, John. I'm not.
So also, I had your grade book. I was going to bring it, but I decided that wasn't a good thing to do.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Can you give it up for our panelists, please? Thank you so much for those who watched and streamed with us. Come back next month. We're going to have a great conversation on race and different things like that. If you want to know more about education issues, feel free to talk to these guys afterwards. Or I want to encourage you to do something that I do with my kids as teachers. Don't just contact your teachers when you have a problem, your kids as teachers. At the end of every year, I ask my kids, what did you love about your teacher the most? And then I make sure that I communicate it, because I don't trust that my kids will communicate it to their teachers. I make sure that I thank them for what they do, because they don't get paid much. They're drastically underpaid. They put out more fires than they're appreciated. And it's just a way to, I think, give you guys some currency for what you do, to hopefully that you know then that the community and parents are behind you guys and what you guys do.
Yeah, I wanted to tell her I'm not I can talk about it. An amazing teacher that taught with John and she retired as well, told me my first year of teaching, take a file folder and put every good note you get from a parent or a student in that file folder. Those days that are not quite going your way, open it up and read it and know you're still making a difference.
So thanks so much for coming. We hope to see you again here next month for our next discussion over dinner. Have a great night.